Welcome to 49ers Camelot, the show that is 49ers based, but it's brand new. So you can still decide if you like it or hate it. Last week we had John Chapman of 49ers Rush. Today we have Ted from Ted Talks Ball. I know that you've seen him on Twitter and you probably watched his stuff. Love this guy. He does great work. Great writer. Puts out a lot of content, and so I hope that you're following him. Ted, tell us where they can find you.
Hey, Marc, thanks for having me on. I'm real honored to be an early guest on your show. I'm excited that you finally decided to do this. We were kind of wondering, like, when's Marc going to make his own show? Because you deserve to have one. And I think people are going to love what you do. So I'm excited for you and excited to be a little part of it here. So thanks for having me. People can find me on Twitter at TedH6, on YouTube, Ted Talks Ball. You can see that there in the headline. Those are the two main places. I have an Instagram account, but it's really more to drive traffic to YouTube, which is my main thing that I'm trying to promote.
You put out a lot of stuff. I mean, I see articles that you write. I see podcasts. Where do you find the time to do all of this?
Well, I mean, I've been very busy. It definitely takes a lot of time, arranging the shows and then, doing them and then putting them out to different sources, putting them out to Instagram and Facebook and whatnot. It's been a full-time effort. Luckily, I work from home, so I've had some time to dedicate to it, and then still found time to continue to be a technical recruiter as well. But trying to make it so that I can do this full time. That's the goal.
Yeah,
someday.
That's cool.
It takes some time to get it done, though.
Yeah, last week when I talked to John Chapman, he's doing it full time, and that's great. He's so good, and he's great working with others and helping new YouTubers, new podcasts, getting exposure for them. So he's such a great guy. But I told him, like, I don't know. I love the 49ers. So would I ever want to do this full time? I don't know, because then it's a job. Like right now it's not a job. But I've heard you say that same thing, that like you love doing this, and so it's like you're not working. So that's great, and I wish you the best, because you deserve it and you're doing great stuff. So let's jump in, because we have some things to talk about from the 2022 season and from looking forward to what lies ahead for the 49ers. So let's talk 2022. What did you take away? What were some of the things that you walked away from the 2022 season thinking, man, this is a big thing?
Well, obviously Christian McCaffrey was a huge pickup for us. And it was great to see Brock Purdy come in and run that offense better than anyone has since Kyle's been here in San Francisco. Those were the two takeaways on offense. I mean, looking outside of the 49ers, I looked at the Super Bowl teams this year, the Eagles and the Chiefs, and they probably have the two best offensive lines in football. So I would like to see us work on our offensive line to improve that. Other takeaways would be, Bosa needs some help on that D-line. We need another defensive end to go on the other end, whether that's Drake Jackson, if he can come up in his second year a little bit better. I think we need something a little more concrete, though, something a little more proven to rely on. And then I think Eric Armstead needs help, too, on the inside. Kinlaw is just too unreliable with that knee. And so those are some of my big things that I'll be looking for in the offseason would be right tackle, defensive tackle, and defensive end. And then I would throw in one more, which would be tight end. I've kind of wanted a tight end since the 2020 draft, and one who can block and one who can catch. And some people will say, oh, it's a reaction to the Hassan Reddick injuring Purdy. That's part of it. But ultimately, this is something, like I said, I've been wanting 2020 draft, 2021 draft, 2022 draft. So maybe I'll get it in the 2023 draft.
We'll see. Yeah. We saw last night during the Super Bowl that even though Philly has this great defensive line, a great offensive line, which is what the Chiefs have, kind of shut them down. Did they even sack Mahomes once? I don't recall them getting to him, but they may have, but I don't remember them getting to him. So I think that's huge. And so a great offensive line. We saw that back when Jim Harbaugh was here. The best offensive line in football during that time. And because of that, they were one of the prominent teams in the league. So yeah, you're right. And when I had John Chapman on last week, I asked him, hey, what do you think they need to do to take the next step? And he said defensive line. That was his thing. So yeah, I'm right there with you, man. Offensive line, defensive line, for sure. So I asked John this question, and I want to ask you because I think it's a really interesting question. What is one thing that happened in 2022 that you think could impact the team down the road? It could be something like Trey Lance having another setback, and so it's going to take him yet even longer, or it could be Brock Purdy's emergence. John, I asked John this question, and his choice was the emergence of Talanoa Hufanga. He thinks that's a huge thing for the 49ers moving forward. So what would your one thing be that you really think is going to benefit them or hurt them down the road?
Well, I mean, not to be a downer, but I would have to say Brock Purdy's UCL on his elbow. There's been a lot of back and forth conflicting information. Will it be a Tommy John full replacement? Will it be a internal brace repair? Ultimately, we won't know until February 22nd when the doctors open it up and see what they're working with in there. But, if he's not here for the 2023 season, that would be a real negative impact. I really like Trey Lance. I'm really bullish on him. I believed even before the Purdy injury that Trey Lance at some point could end up as our number one quarterback because of his higher ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
But, week 1 of 2023, I don't think he'll be ready to take the reins just yet. Mm-hmm. I think it'll take more time, and maybe he'll get the time to do that, and maybe he can prove it. But I would love to have both of them healthy, and that's one thing that I see being a potential negative in 2023.
Yeah, and I'm with you with the Trey thing. I mean, I think probably if Brock Purdy, if the surgery goes like they're hoping, and come September he's ready to go, I'm curious, like if they're going to have any kind of quarterback competition. I kind of think that they're not going to. That he's going to be the guy, and I base that some of that has to do with the fact that Kyle Shanahan calls plays differently when Brock Purdy is in there versus when Trey Lance or Jimmy Garoppolo is in there. He takes more chances, which tells me he trusts him. The other thing is what Matt Mayoko said last week, that a 49ers player told him. Now this wasn't a shot at Trey Lance. There was discussion. This was before Tom Brady retired. So there was discussion on whether Brady might come to the 49ers. And there was a player that told Mayoko there are going to be a lot of pissed off people in here if Brock Purdy's not the guy. And so the way that Matt took that wasn't shade at Trey Lance, but rather, hey, don't bring somebody in from the outside. We have the guys that have this. And so that kind of makes me think that Brock is going to be the guy that they pick. And so maybe he's QB1 now, but in a few years, I think that it's very possible that Trey Lance is going to be better than him. Is that kind of how you see it?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the thing is that even if Trey comes in and does really well in OTAs and camp and preseason, it's really hard to overtake Brock because he has the 6 straight wins in the regular season plus 2 playoff wins. I mean, the guy's never lost a game he's finished. So it's really hard for Lance to beat him out. The only thing I would say when we're trying to compare the two that makes it a little more difficult is obviously we haven't seen Trey Lance with CMC, with Christian McCaffrey, and we've barely seen him with Kittle. And when Trey Lance lost, our team was struggling kind of before and after Trey Lance lost. And when our team wasn't struggling, Trey Lance won. So the gap may not be quite as wide as people think, but it's really hard, no matter how well you do during preseason, to take away something from Brock, who proved it in the regular season. So yeah, I think the only way is if that UCL keeps him out longer than week 1, or if he is able to come back and then he ends up getting injured again in 2023, which tends to happen to our quarterback. So I think there's a high likelihood that we'll see Lance at some point next season, no matter what. But yeah, I don't see how you could just hand the job to Lance, no matter how well he does in the preseason.
Yeah. And, there are people that like to point to that Chicago game and say, well, look, they lost. He was terrible. If you look at his numbers, he wasn't any worse than Jimmy Garoppolo was the season before when they played the Colts in another downpour. And, people pick on Trey Lance, but they forget the fact that, remember that opening drive, he took them all the way down, and then Deebo Samuel fumbled right inside the 5-yard line. So, nobody talks about that, but because he had them in a position to score, and they ended up turning the ball over. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think that he has really good potential. Now, I think that maybe one of the things that they see how, especially in that game, how Justin Fields moved so well and how he just was running away from people. And Trey Lance, I even tweeted it at the time that he looks like he's in slow motion. But I think that that's in comparison to Justin Fields. Trey Lance is not a running quarterback like Justin Fields or Lamar Jackson. I see him as a pocket quarterback who can run, and there's a difference between the two. So, what do you think about what do you think about that? As far as do you see him as a running quarterback?
I see it. I mean, I feel like Kyle kind of played him that way, and that's what he was at North Dakota State. But the level of competition in a 1AA school, where North Dakota State is sort of like the Alabama of that conference. Yeah, he was able to kind of truck people and run them over, and you just can't do that in the NFL.
Yeah.
So I totally agree. I would love to see Kyle call a game plan like he calls for Purdy or he calls for Jimmy Garoppolo for Trey Lance, where there's more throwing and less. You have to run some to establish the threat of the run to make the defense play 11 on 11 football. But I think you could probably run a half or a quarter as often, and certainly not so many up the middle. I'd love to see more running out to the edge, where it's a little bit safer, where you get more one-on-ones with DBs rather than dog piles with defensive tackles and linebackers. But the biggest humans on the field, or at least on the defense anyway. So.
Yeah, I'd like to see him do what Patrick Mahomes did last night on that game-winning drive. When there's when the defense opens up and there's a hole, take it. That was one of the biggest plays of the game, maybe the biggest last night. So yeah, that was huge. The next question that I was going to ask was, Are you one of the ones that believes that Brock Purdy is QB1, or is it still too early? But I kind of think you've already answered that. You're not ready to believe that he's the guy.
Oh, for 2023, I am. For week 1 of 2023, if he's healthy, he should be the guy for sure. QB1 in 2024 or at the end of the 2023 season, it's a little tougher to say, but it'll be tough for Trey to unseat him. It would take, like I said, a great preseason, and then I think some really great games in the regular season too. Trey would need to learn to do some of the things that Brock Purdy does so well.
Yeah, and his accuracy, I think, it has been a big thing, and that's one of the things that Trey's not quite there yet. But I've been a little slower coming around on Brock Purdy. I like him. I want him to succeed, obviously, and he's passed every test that I've had so far. So like I said, he did great against the Dolphins. He needs to beat the Bucs in his first start, and then he did that, and then he kept on, and then now he's in the playoffs. This is when it gets real, so he needs to be able to beat the Cowboys, and then he did that, and so I just I was impressed with him all along. But I feel like we've seen over time throughout history, we've seen quarterbacks come on the scene and look like they're the next Dan Marino, and then they're not. And so I guess I'm optimistic, but I'm cautiously optimistic because I'm just not sure yet. So that's kind of what's holding me back. So
yeah, and I guess I would say I see him as QB1 vis-a-vis Trey Lance. But if we had a better option, then I would probably be more like with you. I mean, I definitely said all along, I'm not a big fan of his height, 6'1.5" and he doesn't have great arm strength. And I just really hope, knock on wood, that this UCL injury doesn't compromise his already sort of marginal arm strength. So those are two things where I could see a lot of improvement. Also, as you know, we start to pay Nick Bosa next season, more than likely, $30+ million a year. Then, we'll probably have less weapons, or it looks like our weapons are probably in place for next year, but O-line will probably suffer. Defense will probably suffer. So what the formula that allowed Brock Purdy to be a winner in 2022 may not be there in 2023 and moving forward. So it may require someone with a higher ceiling like Trey Lance getting up to speed.
Yeah. Let's say that they get in to perform this surgery and it ends up being a Tommy John. And let's say that it's going to cost him the 2023 season, or at least the majority of it. Do you think that they're going to bring somebody in to potentially compete with Trey Lance, or do you think that they're just going to turn it over to him and then maybe bring in somebody to back him up? What do you think about that?
I think it'd be both. I think you would get some sort of a veteran as a backup, a Gardner Minshew, a Jacoby Brissett, a Teddy Bridgewater. Maybe if we're lucky, Tyler Huntley from the Ravens. I've always had my eye on him. Ideally, it would be a quarterback with the characteristics that are similar to Trey Lance, so that if Trey Lance gets injured, you don't have to scrap everything you worked on in OTAs and preseason like we did this year when Jimmy came in week 2. All of a sudden, everything we worked on all summer went out the door for the Trey Lance system.
Right.
So yeah, I think we'll pick up some sort of a veteran backup QB, and I think we'll draft another quarterback too who might compete for a starting job. It's probably unrealistic to think that a late round QB will have success like Brock Purdy did. But maybe Brian Griese can find another gem. Who knows?
But you don't expect a David Carr kind of quarterback that would come in and be the starter.
Oh, Derek Carr?
Yeah, Derek Carr. Sorry. We've already had David Carr.
Yes, we have. Yeah, no doubt. I would not want to see Derek Carr unless he took a massive pay cut.
Yeah.
And I guess he probably will. It looks like the Raiders are about to release him. I mean, I think he's kind of comparable to Jimmy Garoppolo. So maybe at the right price, if we could get him like what we got Jimmy for this year, kind of like that $10 to $15 million range, sure. I just think he was supposed to make 40. I think he'll probably make 25. I'd rather, or 30 even. I don't want to pay that much for him. But I'd be open to whatever. I mean, I think we need good options. And I hadn't really thought about Derek Carr. I mean, he was Fresno State. It's an interesting option. I mean, like I said, I mean, he reminds me a lot of Jimmy Garoppolo. Just doesn't get injured as often. So
yeah, probably throws deep more often.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's probably not a bad idea, actually, Mark. It's kind of growing on me as we speak.
Well, I'm not endorsing it. I'm just wondering if they might do something like that, depending, like you said earlier, this surgery that's coming up in just over a week is going to be a really big a big day for the 49ers to see what happens going forward. So speaking of Jimmy Garoppolo, the season ended kind of in an interesting way. First, he wasn't ready for the NFC Championship, which I never thought that he would be ready for that game. And obviously, I'm not a doctor. Don't play one on TV. Didn't stay in a Holiday Inn Express last night. So I don't know anything about that stuff. But it just seemed like an injury that, gosh, it just seemed early to me. But so he's not ready for the NFC Championship game. During the game, when they're being blown out, he's on the sidelines laughing, which probably is meaningless, but it still was something that a lot of 49ers fans have commented on. Then there's the way that Shanahan talked about him in the press conference, where he just kind of seemed to blow off Jimmy Garoppolo. And then the fact that Jimmy Garoppolo wasn't even around for the press conferences that the other players were around for. So then Tim Kawakami comes out with this. I don't know if it was a report, it was part of a mailbag that he was doing for The Athletic. But in it, he said something to the effect that just some things that he's heard made him think that the relationship between Jimmy Garoppolo and Kyle Shanahan, and maybe even John Lynch as well, has gone south as the season progressed. So do you think there's anything to this, or do you think that it's just end of the year drama stuff that the 49ers are always seem to be in the middle of?
I think where there's smoke, there's fire a lot of times. Ultimately, only Jimmy and his doctor really know the truth about his foot. But I will say most bone injuries, broken bones, that is, heal within 6 to 8 weeks. And it was 9 weeks from week 12 to NFC Championship game effectively as week 21 of the season. So, here's the thing. All right. We don't know, but there's signs. So that's one sign. Another sign is that the Niners never put him on IR. So they expected him to come back. If they knew he wasn't going to be able to come back. Now, granted, it could have not put him on IR so that he could be ready for the Super Bowl. And it did sound like maybe that was going to be the case, that he would have been ready 2 more weeks later. So I can't speak to. But clearly they didn't put him on IR. And yeah, it seems like some of the players, some of the comments, like Debo was saying, boy, if we had just had one more QB, we might have been a whole different result in that game against the Eagles. And that's clearly who he was talking about one more QB. So, yeah, I think if the Niners had known that Jimmy and Lance weren't going to be back, I think they would have done a better job of finding a backup for Brock Purdy than Josh Johnson. I do believe, even though they said all along that they weren't going to bring Trey Lance back this season, I always believed that if Trey Lance was healthy and could play, that they would put him in instead of Josh Johnson if Jimmy or Brock were to get injured.
Right.
So I think, ultimately, and I saw Jimmy smiling on the sideline, and I commented on it. I was unhappy with it, especially after seeing him smile after the Broncos game, when not only did we lose, but he was a big reason that we lost that game. Like I'm not going to sit here and say Trey Lance was a big reason we lost in Chicago. Like you said, it was the defense, 100 yards in penalties, the drive extending penalties on every single Bear scoring drive, Debo, the lost fumble in the red zone that was 3 to 7 points off the board. But Jimmy, in Denver was a big contributing factor to that loss, stepping out of the end zone, the fumble, the interception. So it's not a good look. I think that's probably why the relationship soured, is because Kyle thought Jimmy was going to come back. And then, people say, oh, well, Teddy had the walking boot on, so he couldn't have come back. And I don't know if you're old like me, Mark, but I remember a Brady Bunch episode where the guy had the neck brace on, and Mike Brady dropped the briefcase and he turned his head.
Oh, that's great.
You can wear these things to make it look like you're injured, and you're just kind of faking it. And I'm not saying Jimmy did that, but I'm saying he could have. All right. So ultimately, I'm glad he's going, and I'll just leave it at that. We don't know what really happened, but I'll just say that it doesn't seem far-fetched that that's what happened to me.
Yeah, there's the part of me that thinks, well, he's about to be a free agent. He probably wants to protect himself from getting injured again so that he can have a big payday. But then again, there is the part of him that last year played with a jacked up thumb and a jacked up shoulder, and he was the starter, and so I realize that's different. But yeah, I agree that there's probably something to it when different people are saying similar things. And great Brady Bunch reference.
And ultimately, it's like some people say, well, he doesn't owe us anything. We didn't have any money guaranteed for him next season. And I get that if it's like a meaningless game at the end of the season, we're out of it. Like, why go in there and risk your body for a meaningless game? But this is about as far from meaningless as you can get. So again, I don't know if that's what happened, but if it comes out, if it ever is determined that that's what happened, then it should really affect his value, because if he did it to us, I think he'd be likely to do it to another team as well too.
Yeah. So let's switch gears and talk defense, because obviously DeMeco Ryans left to go be the head coach of the Houston Texans, and the 49ers hired Steve Wilks from the Carolina Panthers. He was the interim head coach and did a really good job there. What did you think about that hire? You think that's the right fit? I heard today some stat that I don't know who put it out, but he blitzes at a higher rate than what the 49ers are used to. So I'll be curious to see if he continues with that, or maybe his blitz rate in the past has been a result of not having as much talent up front as he has now. But what do you think of that hire?
I really like the hire. When I heard that Vic Fangio was in the mix, I said privately and publicly that I thought we could do better, that we could find somebody younger and more dynamic. I think Steve Wilks is about 20 years younger than Vic Fangio. And, he's a DB's coach. And so now we've got great coaches at all three levels. We got Kosurik for the D-line, because he wouldn't go with DeMeco to Houston. We got Johnny Hollins, who's a great linebackers coach who was helping DeMeco coach the linebackers. And now we got Steve Wilks for the secondary. And I think we're going to need a lot of help in the secondary, because, I think Jimmy Ward will walk. It sounds like Tayshaun Gibson might retire. We don't know when Emmanuel Mosley will be back from his ACL. And even if that's if he stays with the Niners, and we don't know if he'll stay with the Niners either. I think he will, but these are some big question marks in our secondary. That's 3/5 of our secondary there. Plus we've got the young Samuel Womack, who I expect to see playing a lot more next season, along with Lenore and Mooney Ward, Charvarius Ward there on the other side. So I'm a big fan of Wilks. Like you said, he did really well in Carolina. He got them on a win streak after, Matt Rule was fired the week after we played them. And he got them on a win streak, got them in contention for the NFC South crown, almost got a playoff spot. And, then they hired Frank Reich, and the players were all up in arms. Like, not all. A lot of the players were up in arms.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we wanted Steve Wilks. What are you guys doing? So I'm really happy with the hire. I think it's a great hire. I liked Chris Harris' idea too. It's just Chris Harris coming from being a DB's coach. There's less chance of him walking in and just taking over everything and just being like, okay, Kyle, just give me the defense and you just worry about what you need to worry about. I think Kyle would have had to have been more involved with Chris Harris. So I think that's a benefit of Steve Wilks.
Yeah. And he did that in Carolina without Christian McCaffrey. So trading away probably their best player. And yet he still had some success there. So yeah, I'm excited about that as well.
And I guess one last thing that might be a good thing is he may bring some players from the Panthers too. They have a few free agents on their defense, and some of them might be good fits for us as well.
Yeah, good. Well, speaking of free agents, the 49ers have, I think, 21 unrestricted free agents. I think they have 24 total, and 3 are restricted. So they'll, in all likelihood, be back. But of the 21 unrestricted free agents, who would be at the top of your list as maybe a few that you definitely would like to see back?
I mean, almost none of them.
Really? All right.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to, I beat up Mike McGlinchey a lot this season, and he actually had a real good season. So if the money's right, I would love to see us keep Mike McGlinchey, not because I really like him that much, but just because without packaging some picks to move up, I don't know how you get a replacement right tackle.
Yeah.
To replace him or spending a ton of money in free agency. And I don't think either of those are attractive options. I'm not wild about McKivitz. I'd love to see us keep Brendel and Brunskill. Brendel did a good job as a center. He's a good pass blocker. I'd love to see him improve his run blocking or get somebody that we're grooming who could be a better run blocking center. And then Brunskill, is a great fit for any position on the O-line. He filled in, he platooned well with Burford, and he filled in well for Aaron Banks, which may price him out of our category. But those three would be pretty big for me. I was going to say Amenahu, but the domestic violence charge, unless that somehow clears up, I wouldn't want to re-sign him with that looming over his head. Even though the initial reports sounded like there was no signs of physical damage when the police arrived, and there was no initial medical examination at the scene of the event. But the girlfriend could have gotten that later, so we don't know. Yeah. It's a risky situation. Other than that, like I said, Mosley, I'd like to keep him. If there's some way to keep Jimmy Ward, great. It just seems like he's gone. I don't see him staying, and I'd love to keep Deshaun Gibson for a year. But if he's going to retire, then that kind of ties our hands there. And then Bobby Gold.
Yeah, that's what I was.
So I went from none, now I'm up to 6, right? So
yeah, it's hard when you have that many of them on a good team. You want to bring back as many as you can, but like you mentioned, like on a good team like this, these guys are going to be expensive, and so hopefully they can bring some of them back at the right price point. I'm sure that they will. Let me give you a last question. What's your biggest concern for the 2023 season?
I would just say probably safety position. I like Talanoa Hufanga. He's had a real strong start to the season, but he definitely tailed off in the back half of the season. He seemed to kind of get things under control towards the end. But, with losing Jimmy Ward, with losing Tayshaun Gibson, that's a concern for me. I think we'll be okay at linebacker with McCrary Ball filling in for Azeez Al-Shire, especially since that's only for base downs. And we still have Trey and Fred for nickel packages and whatnot. The biggest concern, that would be for defense, and for offense, it's Brock Purdy's elbow. That UCL scares me. And I guess then if Brock Purdy's not ready, then can Trey Lance stay healthy? Because he's obviously had some health issues and limited action already too. So.
Yeah, that's good. That's good response. I asked John Chapman the same question, because I think like the other one that I asked of you, that I asked of him, I thought that was an interesting question to get your take on that. His biggest concern was the defensive line, which is definitely a concern, especially considering that has been one of the biggest strengths of this team. But down as the season progressed, it became less of a strength, and so that's a concern. You mentioned safety. That one of the things that I asked John was if Talanoa Hufanga made this big leap, who do you see that could make another leap like that? And he mentioned Quantrez Knight, and that he thought that he would be perfect at the safety position. He took some reps at safety, and so he wasn't ready to predict that Knight would be the 49ers starting free safety in 2023, but he said keep an eye on that. So I thought that was a pretty interesting take from John. But anything else that you want to add? Want to take a shot at Philly fans? I'm happy that they're crying today.
Yeah, I definitely I changed my avatar for a little while to that to their coach crying, and
Yeah.
and I had a Eagles cry banner up for a little while I was trolling them today. But no, I mean, they want to complain about the grass. And I guess I can see why they are complaining about it, because it kind of reminded me a little bit of the snow field in Buffalo, where the Buffalo pass rushers couldn't get good footing to take advantage of a weak Bengals offensive line. The Bengals were missing their left tackle, their left guard, and their right tackle for that game. And I thought there was no way that they could slow down the Bills pass rush. But the snowy field did it. This wet field in Arizona did kind of help the Chiefs offensive line a little bit. But ultimately, they want to complain about this holding call at the end of the game. Well, there was plenty of missed calls throughout the game that were benefiting the Eagles. So, and the player himself, Bradbury, admitted that it was a hold. So I think it's kind of silly.
And they
it's a
didn't
shame
have
that the game ended that way, but
they didn't have a problem with the Jimmy Ward called pass interference in the NFC Championship game. That was a terrible call because he was still within that 5-yard limit. So you never want to blame the refs. I mean, things happen. Calls are missed every single play, but yeah, I think that they're a pretty unclassy fan base, and so I was happy to see them lose. But hey, listen, Ted, thanks so much. I know you have to go. I appreciate your time. If you haven't started following Ted on Twitter, please do. Great follow on Twitter. Great writer. You can see some of the stuff that he writes, and also find him on YouTube at Ted Talks Ball. Does a lot of stuff. I don't see how he finds time to do this. And if you want to find me on YouTube, you can subscribe at 49ers Camelot. Like I said last week, that'll make you my best friend, and we can talk 49ers and banter and complain and whatever it is that we want to do. But thanks, Ted, for joining us. It's been an honor to have you, and I look forward to working with you again. And thank you guys for joining us and for watching the 49ers Camelot Show. Check us out. Make sure you check out Ted Talks Ball as well.
Thanks, Mark. Have a good one.
You too.